Like Foundation and Empire, Second Foundation is divided into two stories. The first is about the efforts of the Mule to find and destroy the Second Foundation in the wake of Beta's disruption. They're the one serious obstacle he faces to galactic domination, because they're a secret force rather than an open threat like the first Foundation was that he could just overwhelm with ships or with the power of his mind. So the Mule is forced to stop his expansion and consolidate his forces for 5 years, trying to ferret out where his enemy is. And there's nothing more frustrating than a mule trying to ferret. Finally, he sends General Pritchard, his former would-be assassin, now the Mule's right-hand man, along with Bail Chanis, an up-and-comer with ambitions that the Mule says can be used to further his own ends, and that he is not converted. Chanis and Pritchard don't see eye to eye because Pritchard doesn't trust his motives and Chanis dislikes his attitude. But Chanis believes that he has found the location of the Second Foundation and even takes Pritchard there before he has a chance to agree. And after much consideration has decided that this is indeed the world of the Second Foundation. So Pritchard pulls a gun on him because, as Chanis notes, he must have done his job too well. But Pritchard insists only someone who is part of the Second Foundation would have succeeded so quickly. But Chanis bitch slaps the general with logic until he finally puts the gun down and admits defeat. But then the Mule walks in and challenges Kevin Bacon to a dance contest. The Mule says Pritchard is right. Chanis is part of a Second Foundation, and that all of his attempts at logically worming around this are pointless. He used his mental powers on Chanis back in his office, and Chanis has gotten pissed off about it, sure, but what he had also done was briefly resisted mentally. Something that only someone else with mental powers could do, someone from the Second Foundation. The Second Foundation is the polar opposite of the Foundation. It has no technological science, but it has incredible amounts of psychological science, so much so that it can train its members to develop mental powers. Of course, Chanis is a threat, so the Mule's ready to blast him, only it makes a miscalculation. Chanis removed the Mule's control over Pritchard, restoring him to the man who was ready to suicide bomb the Mule, and is presently armed with a blaster of his own. The Mule could kill Chanis before Pritchard could kill him, so Chanis holds Pritchard back long enough for the Mule to drop his own weapon to resolve this Mexican standoff. Pritchard's knocked out, the Mule is unarmed, now it's just mind on mind. Except the Mule has Chanis really outclassed and rips his mind a new one looking for the answers about the Second Foundation. But then the first speaker of the Second Foundation steps over Kevin Bacon and shows his moves. Turns out Chanis was one of their shittiest members, meant to draw in the Mule so he could be dealt with, since he'd assumed that he'd have the advantage and so let his guard down. It turns out the Second Foundation didn't need a warning. They knew of the threat of the Mule before the Foundation even really took notice of him, but they failed to consider that his mutation might leave him with physical shortcomings, like being sterile, hence the name the Mule. Combine that with a lifetime of mockery, which, as the first speaker says, we allowed only for megalomania, not for intensely psychopathic paranoia as well. The Mule's loathing for the human race for his mistreatment is what makes him a threat. So the first speaker deals with this by striking at the Mule when his guard is down and gets rid of the hatred. So the Mule finishes out his brief reign without further bloodshed and then dies due to his emaciated and unhealthy body. This then sets up the second story, years later, as men of the First Foundation secretly wonder what effect the Second Foundation is still having. Beta's granddaughter, Arcadia, gets pulled into these events because there's a lot of nepotism in Foundation. She'd been born on Trantor but raised on Terminus. Well, she's 14 for all the raising that is. But she's too clever by half, so when her father and his fellow conspirators plan to check out the relics of the Mule's reign in the hopes of learning where to find the Second Foundation, she tags along with the stuttering librarian, Munn, perhaps in the hopes that they can turn this into some kind of Saturday morning cartoon. War breaks out between the Foundation and Calgan, the former capital world of the Mule, and given the unintentionally amusing nickname of the gayest world in space. Throughout her adventures, Arcadia travels hither and yon, worried about the Second Foundation, until she gets a message to her father, "A circle has no end." Code to indicate that the opposite end of the galaxy means if you go all around the circle of the galaxy, you'll wind up back where you started. So the Second Foundation has actually been on Terminus the whole time, hidden in plain sight. Her father then goes one better, creating a mental static device to stop mental powers and a device that emits a field that would cause intense pain in anyone who has such powers so that they could be found and dealt with. Except this was the plan of the Second Foundation all along, as they had to deal with the problem, the one that was behind all of this. See, the Foundation had their asses kicked by the Mule, and then the Second Foundation had to step in and sort him out. So not only does it hurt the First Foundation's self-assurance that they can stand up to an enemy alone, but they'll also believe that they don't need to worry because the Second Foundation will be there. They'll pull the same mistake that the mayor did with the Mule, trying to play the metagame instead of facing the problems that he should have been. His unwavering faith that the plan wouldn't let the Foundation lose prevented him from taking action which, who knows, might have prevented the Foundation from losing. Likewise, if they assume the Second Foundation is there to stop them from falling, then they'll probably fall again. They wouldn't be able to react like they should be, like self-determined people would. So they need to simultaneously give the Foundation a victory, in this case over the first citizen of Calgan, and they needed to make it look like they were gone and the Foundation was running things itself. Of course, the Second Foundation was still around. It really wasn't on Terminus. That was just a trick. The interesting bit with this is that for both sides, the Second Foundation and the Revolutionaries, they wanted the Second Foundation found and dealt with. It's just the former wanted it to be an apparent success rather than the actual success that the latter wanted. Now you might say, why would they want that? Isn't the Second Foundation safeguarding the very plan they've all been believing in? Well, yes and no. But part of it is illustrated by the EEG readings that they take several times throughout to show when mental tampering has taken place. But there's a subtle bit in there that the person has to face away from the device, that no one can see the EEG while it's going on, when it's hooked up to them, without subconsciously desiring to control the output. Likewise, there's a resentment of this kind of control, both direct in the mind and indirect through psychohistory. We want to be secure in our right to think our own thoughts and make our own choices and pursue our own destinies. And the Second Foundation threatens that. It's one thing to follow the plan of Harry Seldon. That plan was just that. A plan, not a doctrine, not a means of control, which is what the Second Foundation is. It's them silently ruling the galaxy. They acknowledge that a dictatorship, however benevolent, would still be resented, so this situation must be created artificially. They seem to have good intentions. We're not talking about giving them all grand throne rooms and such. But it is still a group simply deciding for itself that they should silently rule via the manipulation of the galaxy through psychohistory. In essence, conspiracy theories like the Illuminati or whatever secretly running the world. And yet this brings the Foundation trilogy back to the same end that Asimov's I, Robot did, with the revelation that the computer brains meant to aid the economy were now running the world and controlling our destiny, doing what was best for our own good, even if it's not what we would necessarily want as individuals or as a species. And Dr. Susan Calvin's response to how horrible is perhaps how wonderful. The same idea that the random forces that control our lives will be brought under the control of some benevolent force, some are still going to resent that, and others will manipulate those who resent to ultimately continue that plan.